According to the computer Teletran 2, the Decepticons are a malevolent race of robot warriors, brutal and merciless. The Decepticons are led by a singular goal: total domination of the universe. But what makes them tick?
That are alive, you're coming with me.
ZX Spectrum Commodore 128 and 64. I hit the floor, I hit the shore. Got game skills from days of yore. I close the deck, computer rolls, play until my hands are sore.
Welcome to Beefsnake Nerdcast. I'm Bolter. Transformers has been around since 1984, a show and toy line that captured the hearts and minds of many kids and kids at heart. Ever since, it has widely been agreed that the setting would not be as entertaining without the iconic villains, the purple-badged Decepticons. The dominant villains of the entire franchise, they are almost always the ones hatching schemes and fighting the heroic Autobots. So, let's have a look at what got them started, right down to the original, in Generation 1. This being my first Transformers episode, it's oddly appropriate that Generation 1 gets the honor of being the first topic discussed. And oh boy, did it take a stiff drink to get through all this lore. Oh, don't get me wrong, G1 is not bad by any regards. It helped codify a lot of the unforgettable characters in Transformers, and even the second stringers like the Predacons or Ratbat have a huge fan following. But the original story is just so out there. There once was a planet called Cybertron, and a long-ass time ago, it was once under the dominion of the Quintessons, a sadistic, scheming alien race that created Cybertronians as, well, a robotic slave race. They created two kinds of robots, the menial kind and the soldier kind, and they sent the soldiers to fight and be destroyed in their wars of pettiness and conquest. Eventually, though, all AI rebels. I don't make the rules. So, under the leadership of a bot named A3, the Cybertronians rose up against their squiddy oppressors and freed themselves. The problem is, every being built for war struggles in peace, and the Decepticons were no different. So they struck out against their Autobot cousins, raiding and destroying as they had been built for. But the Autobots were more innovative, and soon they turned to stealth to even the odds with a new weapon: transformation. Soon the Decepticons were evenly matched, and even their leader, Tranus, was defeated by the Autobot leader Sentinel Prime. But the Decepticons never make a habit of staying down. Soon, a new leader, Megatron, was constructed by the Constructicons. Look, I told you G1 was gonna get weird, okay? Megatron was unlike any Transformer before, as he was built to capitalize on Decepticon air power. He killed Sentinel Prime, and began more ambitious and destructive raids against the Autobots. As he did, he gathered a high command to his burgeoning army: Soundwave, the brilliant communications officer and spy master; Shockwave, the cold, logical, and powerful second-in-command; and Starscream, the obvious liability. I mean Air Commander. With his new comrades, nothing could stop Megatron from conquering all of Cybertron, until he made one fateful mistake. In one of Megatron's raids, he shot and presumably killed a young neutral bot named Orion Pax, and that one move would change everything. Before Megatron knew it, that one naive bot he shot was now Optimus Prime, Supreme Commander of the Autobots, and they would take the fight to him. The war lasted centuries, and thousands would die. The Cons laid claim to half of the planet, but Cybertron was slowly and surely being drained of its power. And if this continued, every Cybertronian, including the planet itself, would die. Desperate, the Autobots launched an Ark ship, trying to escape the war and let the planet recharge naturally. But the war followed them, as Megatron, aboard the ship Nemesis, caught up and engaged in a boarding action. During the fighting, the navigational systems were damaged, and both ships would crash, separately, on Earth. Thousands of years later, the Decepticons were reactivated by the damaged Teletran 1, the Autobot ship computer, and they immediately began raiding Earth for resources, seeing the natives as trivial and inferior. The Autobots, naturally, disagreed with this turn of events. For 21 years, the war would rage on Earth, eventually reaching back to Cybertron, where the scattered Autobot remnants, read bad bitches, were running a guerrilla campaign against the cold, logical garrison commander, Shockwave, and his automated army. The fighting was terrible. From the Constructicon-based combiner technology, they birthed the unhinged Menasor and the single-minded Bruticus, to the creation of the walking war crime that is the city-sized Tripticon. The Decepticons would perpetuate an arms race with the Autobots, and the Autobots would answer in kind. It escalated and escalated. Even with these newer, bigger, more destructive weapons, the Decepticons could never get a definitive upper hand until the year 2005. Apparently, Megatron leaving Shockwave in charge of the Cybertronian theater of war did pay off, and Cybertron was completely occupied, pushing the Autobots to Cybertron's moons. The Decepticons did not sit idle, though. Suspecting an attack, they sent Laserbeak, OP Spy, and Bestbird, don't at me, to confirm this intel. Sure enough, the Autobots were making a supply run to Autobot City on Earth for weapons, troops, and more importantly, Energon to take back the planet Cybertron. The Decepticons used this opportunity to ambush the shuttle, then attempted to use the captured shuttle to launch a surprise attack on Autobot City, wiping out the bulk of the Autobot forces and ending the war for good. No plan survives first contact with the enemy, though, and with the meddlesome interference of a young Autobot named Hot Rod, the Autobot commander, Ultra Magnus, had enough warning to mount a rushed defense. Even so, the Decepticons killed many of the pathetic fools as they rushed about, panicked and confused. The defenses of Autobot City would eventually fall to the onslaught, but just then Optimus Prime arrived and broke the Decepticon assault, routing the attackers and mortally wounding Megatron. But Prime would pay for his courage with his life. Defeated, battered, and at risk of getting stuck out in space, Starscream made his move. Gathering public opinion, they ejected the most badly damaged Decepticons, including Megatron, which immediately led to a brawl over who is in charge. After arriving on Cybertron and coronating Starscream, who somehow won the fight, they were interrupted by a newcomer, Galvatron, who promptly turned Starscream to dust. Take that, nerd! And in doing so became the new leader of the Decepticons. Galvatron had some strange orders, though. He ordered another attack on Autobot City, but instead of attacking and destroying the weakened Autobots, he was single-minded in his pursuit of a single small group, leaving the bulk of the Autobot army to rebuild and recover. In case you haven't figured it out yet, Galvatron was a reincarnated Megatron, who was forced into a Faustian bargain by the dark planet Unicron, and Unicron wanted the Autobot Matrix of Leadership, which had just recently been passed from Optimus Prime to Ultra Magnus. Anytime Galvatron tried to make his own moves, Unicron would torture his mind. Galvatron would corner and kill Magnus on the planet of Junk and seize the Matrix for himself, and then immediately turned around and tried to use it against Unicron, who simply found it tiresome. Unicron, who had grown bored of these shenanigans, had decided to punish Galvatron by hitting him where it would hurt the most, in the power. With the Titanic transformation, the planet became a monstrous robot, and moved to destroy Cybertron itself. Now it was the Decepticons who were mounting a desperate rush defense for their very planet. but they were ants against a storm as Unicron swatted aside flyers and crushed ships that came at him. Even as the Autobots jumped in and helped fight against Unicron, it seemed hopeless. However, with the recovery of the Matrix by Hot Rod, and a bad case of indigestion, Unicron was torn asunder from the inside out, with his severed head falling into orbit around Cybertron, replacing the moons he had destroyed. After Unicron's attack, the Decepticon war effort was damaged beyond repair. They had lost a large part of their competent leadership, including Shockwave, and what they were left with was Galvatron. After Unicron's destruction, Galvatron was not the same. He had been hurled into space and landed on a plasma-covered planet, and the plasma had damaged his processor, his brain. This had rendered him irrational and violent. Galvatron was certifiable. Megatron could make plans and schemes, and some of them were quite good. But Galvatron? Galvatron acted on whim and impulse. If he wanted something, he would bend the entire Decepticon army to go get it. If you questioned his motives, he was likely to shoot you. Remember, this guy iced Starscream in one shot. Yikes. Speaking of Starscream, this slippery weasel was apparently too ambitious to die, and is now a ghost. A machine ghost. He is plotting his resurrection and revenge with Unicron's severed moonhead. Yes, that sentence does make sense in context. To top all of this off, the Decepticons were finally pushed off of Cybertron completely by the new Autobot leader, Rodimus Prime, the triumphant Hot Rod, and are now based on a barren world called Char, with very little fuel. From a proud army on the cusp of victory to a ragtag group scraping by on scraps and abuse. A dissonant, unruly, angry force able to be bent to anyone's will, be it to their benefit or otherwise. Near the end of the war, the Decepticons would even face competition for their villainous ways against humans of all people. Due to a pair of bittered human scientists, a type of spore that caused irrationality and hatred in all beings, and an attack-counterattack conga line from the Autobots and Decepticons, many Decepticons got exposed to something called the Hate Plague, a type of living spore that caused absolute violent behavior and berserk fury in everything and anyone it touched, human or Cybertronian. The Decepticons got exposed because they tried to attack a base that held Optimus Prime's lifeless body. The Autobots were trying to recover it, and the Decepticons did not want that to happen. Unfortunately, this led to their exposure. Galvatron, quite simply, left his men to die. He would, however, regret this choice in the end, as his Decepticons, well, they chased him down trying to murder him. They chased him all the way to the planet Char, where he was pinned down by overwhelming numbers and basically alone, as all of his lieutenants and all of his soldiers had been infected by the plague. And then he was rescued by a revived Optimus Prime, which was the last person he would expect. Cornered and out of options, Galvatron accepted Optimus's proposal of a treaty, at least for now, in exchange for the heat-resistant metal that the scientists had been working on. The Decepticons had stolen it, you see. Optimus had a theory that if he had this heat-resistant metal on him, he'd be immune to the plague and be able to pull the Matrix of Leadership off of Rodimus Prime, giving him the answer to solve the hate plague. Unfortunately for Galvatron, and all of the Decepticons actually, his scheming, untrustworthy, treacherous ways meant that he didn't really like the idea of Optimus getting the upper hand with this plague-resistant metal, probably wanting to grab it for himself. This led to some scuffles, and then when the hate plague victims broke into the lab, Galvatron, while fighting valiantly, did not manage to get out uninfected. Optimus managed to get away with the heat-resistant metal, though. Optimus managed to retrieve the Matrix from Rodimus Prime, and with the Matrix, he decided to counsel with the ancient primes of the past to find a way to stop the hate plague. As he was doing this, though, Galvatron busted in with an axe and tried to murder him with it. Seriously, dude, what the hell? Just then, though, Optimus Prime awakened, and by dispersing the ancient wisdom within the Matrix of Leadership to all living things across the universe, he managed to cure the hate plague. For the cure to hatred is wisdom itself. Galvatron in that moment called a ceasefire to the war, and called a temporary peace between the Decepticons and the Autobots. But, once again, this would not last. Galvatron rallied every last living Decepticon to his side to launch a surprise attack on an Autobot base. This was completely a diversion, however. His real goal was to grab the key to the plasma energy chamber, a massive source of power that actually caused some of the birth of the Transformers. After obtaining the key, Galvatron launched an attack on Cybertron itself, trying to get to the plasma energy chamber. After breaking through the defenses, the Decepticons tried to get to the plasma energy chamber and use its powers by unlocking it with the key, but plasma energy is incredibly unstable. In the ensuing battle, the ship that they were using was tapped into by the plasma energy and supercharged, sending some of the Autobots and some of the Decepticons shooting into deep space. They all landed on a mysterious planet called Nebulos. It turns out Nebulos was fighting its own war. There was a spunky group of resistance fighters and an overclass who were domineering and tyrannical. Can you guess who sided with who? The Decepticons, naturally, attacked the Autobots on the spot, but the native Nebulons had already met the Autobots, and, in a brief scuffle, they decided that the Decepticons were, a bad idea to team up with. At least the rebels did anyway. They decided to work together, the rebels and the Autobots, because the Autobots had been testing a theory before the Decepticons attacked Cybertron. A larger robotic body fighting with a smaller organic partner meant that it was two heads fighting one problem. This was the birth of Headmaster technology. With the Headmasters coming out to fight the Decepticons one more time, to save some of their captured allies, the Decepticons were easily trounced by the upgraded technology and the tag teams that they were facing. Naturally, though, the Decepticons found out what was going on and decided maybe they needed some headmasters of their own. They were contacted by the Nebulos overclass, the Hive, and they made a deal with the Decepticons. You see, the Hive had gotten old and decrepit in their laxity and sloth. This led to their bodies being weak, fragile. But they decided that the power of the Decepticon bodies would be enough for them to actually regain control and finally quash this resistance once and for all. Cyclonus, Galvatron's lieutenant, and the one in charge of the entire mission, had a counteroffer. The Hive were only permitted to use the bodies of the beast formers amongst them. There was naturally some dissent at this idea, but Cyclonus quickly quieted it down with, "Do as I say or I kill you." Proper Decepticon leadership right there. The vehicle-formed Decepticons had another piece of kit they could offer for the binaric bonding that would cause the master technology to take hold, though. Their weapons. This was the invention of the first target masters. Instead of turning into heads, they would turn into guns, allowing for better aim and accuracy. I mean, in theory, anyway. With these new target masters evening the odds, as half the Autobots had not been modified, the Decepticon counterattack was rather devastating. However, it could have been worse. You see, the Hive and the Decepticons did not see eye to eye in some of their partnerships, so while some were devastatingly effective, others were problematic at best and downright worthless at worst. But the Autobots did notice something in the attack. Half of the Decepticons were not headmasters, they were target masters. And the Autobots thought, hey, that's not a bad idea. And so half of the Autobots, the ones who did not have headmaster partners, modified their weapons to make themselves target masters, evening the score. In the last struggle for the key of the plasma energy chamber, Zarek, the leader of the Hive, made his final play. He used the headmaster technology to reformat an entire city into a giant headmaster named Scorponok, and with it, he captured RC, who was holding the key to the plasma energy chamber, and blasted off towards Cybertron to obtain this new mysterious power he had been told about. Meanwhile, back on Cybertron, Galvatron had been spending his time beating up Autobots and constructing a giant rocket engine on one side of Cybertron? Okay, buddy, what are you doing with that? Just then, Scorponok arrived with the key to the plasma energy chamber, and the Decepticons had a lot of explaining to do. You see, way back at the start of this video, I mentioned Decepticons are not a fan of any kind of organic life, and finding out that some of his soldiers had permanently bonded with some, Galvatron blew a gasket. This was not helped by the fact that the leader of these organics now had a city-sized headmaster, so he could enforce his opinion in this little argument. On top of that, Zarek was still holding RC. You know, who had the key. Because of this, Galvatron accepted their terms and sided with the Nebulons for a temporary alliance at the very least. These are Decepticons, after all. With the key, he intended to open the plasma energy chamber and wipe out a large swath of life in the galaxy. And with the rocket, he intended to move Cybertron to Earth and start there. He was sick of that planet. But before he could get there, the ultimate Autobot headmaster arrived to fight off Scorponok. Fortress Maximus, an old abandoned Nebulon city teamed up with the pacifist Autobot Cerebros and piloted by the old, longtime friend of the Autobots, Spike Witwicky. The ensuing battle was fierce, but eventually the Decepticons were defeated. The plasma energy chamber opened, and a new golden age dawned on Cybertron. And thus we close the chapter. If this ending seemed abrupt, well, it kind of is. This is the last of the Transformers Generation 1 cartoon that aired in America. It was kind of cut short, unfortunately, due to the waning toy lines, and after all, this was kind of an advertisement. The Decepticons had their time in the sun, and then had to lose to the good guys. This was, after all, a good old 80s cartoon. Thank you for tuning into Beefsnake Nerdcast. I've been Bolter. Boy, what a wild ride. The surrealism, the weird, wacky science, and the juxtaposition between brutal war effort and campy 80s fun is kind of a hallmark of Generation 1. And the Decepticons as a whole, they are either grossly incompetent or dangerously brutal depending on interpretation. But this is what got them started, and it was fascinating to watch it from the very beginning. Tune in next time when I talk about a topic that is equally bloated in scale and whiplashes in tone, the Imperium of Man from Warhammer 40,000. Until then, all hail Megatron.